Each of your congregations are unique in what they bring. And so, but we're going to talk about kind of why do we have councils? What are our responsibilities? And what are some things that you can do to help with as leaders of council move into decisions and decision making? So first of all, my name is Lisa Dierks, and I am your vice president for the Southeast Minnesota Synod. I am a member of Trinity Lutheran in Wanamingo. Anybody know where Wanamingo is? Yay, some people know where it is. In my daytime job, I am the regional director for the University of Minnesota Extension in Southeast Minnesota. That means that I cover 12 counties in Southeast Minnesota. Technically, I have an office in Rochester. I'm rarely there because I'm out serving our community members across Southeast Minnesota. So I'm going to talk a little bit and use some resources, both from the ELCA, as well as a resource that is called Committees That Work. And it's a publication from Extension as well to give us some ideas. So, oops, this thing's a little sensitive on the clicking. So first of all, why do we have councils? As the ELCA, why do we even need councils? What's our job? Sure. So I heard you say, so listen to the members of our congregation, bring those ideas together and get to some solution of whatever that might be, right? So that it is the members of our congregation who get to help make decisions and lead the church, right? Not just the pastor. Any pastors, you don't have to raise your hand. Any pastors, they'll sometimes feel like you're leading the things, right? But we have councils to help us with leading. So first of all, within the ELCA Constitution, it says each congregation shall structure itself in such a way as to involve members in fulfilling the definition, purpose, and functions of a congregation of this church. So every ELCA church has councils. So what are the roles of the members of the council, right? So within each of your constitutions, within your congregations, it lists who's on council. So for the Southeast Minnesota Synod, we have officers. So we have the bishop, we have the vice president, we have a secretary, and we have a treasurer. And then we have members of the Synod Council. What about in your own congregation? Who is the council? Name some of the people who are on your council. President, vice president, financial secretary, treasurer. Ooh, financial secretary, treasurer. Are they the same people? Different people, right? Okay, so we have a president, vice president, financial secretary, treasurer, secretary. Oop, I didn't hear. President-elect, right? Somebody waiting in the wings, or you might call them a vice president, depending on what your constitution says, right? Members at large. How many people on your council have members at large? So not everybody has members at large. Anything else? Stewardship chair. Anybody else have a stewardship chair on your council? No? Yep, some in the back. Okay. So my point is, we have some positions that we all have. Presidents, finance people, secretaries, but then our congregations can be a little different with some of those other roles and how they came to join into the council. How about, so that's the council and our officers. What about boards and committees? How many of your congregations have boards? Trinity has a property board. We have an education board. We have a lay ministers board. Who has boards? Who has committees? We have a worship committee. We have an endowment committee, right? So when we think of the structure of our church, typically those officers in the council, we think of them organizationally, that they're at the top of things, and that the boards and committees are reporting up to that council. For those of you who have, let's say, a worship committee. Who does the worship committee report to? Pastor. Council. In our church, we have a lay ministers board. So worship committee would report to a board, the lay ministers board, right? So my point of the conversation of this is that we each have different parts. And in order to lead our parts, we have to know who do they report to? And who do they report to versus who should they be reporting to, right? So if we have I'll keep picking on the worship committee. If we have a worship committee who has the most wonderful organist we've ever had in the life of this church, and we've all decided that they are the leader, that even though the Constitution might say that this committee reports to the lay ministers, it quickly becomes the organist is leading it, right? Instead of who is actually supposed to be leading and helping make decisions. So when you're thinking about kind of who is around the table and thinking, we're going to come back to decision making, but how we're deciding things, the first is we're going to go into a meeting and we want to have a productive meeting. So how many of you, click this, use the same agenda every time your council meets? It's okay. It's okay. At Trinity, it's been the same agenda since like 1929 when we formed the church, or maybe it's 27. I'm not for sure. But what's the first thing? For those of you who had the same agenda every time, what's the first thing? Opening in prayer. Yes, we open in prayer. Then what do we do? Secretary's report, right? We review some minutes, that kind of thing. Yep. Treasurer's report. Yep, sounds pretty much like a normal meeting. Pastor's report. Oh, we don't have one of those. We don't have a pastor, or we don't have a report. Okay. So some congregations, the council, the pastor does a report on what their activities have been. Some councils don't, right? In Trinity, when we get to the boards, this was our usual agenda. I'm the president. We've done all the secretary treasurer stuff. And then who's ever to my left? Whoop, Karen sat in the hot seat and she's board of ed. So she's up first this time. And Steve is property and we go next, and we just go around the table. Like, right? Until the next time Karen doesn't want to be first, so she doesn't sit to my left. Somebody else does, right? You figure out what happens, but it's actually not a written down agenda. Sometimes this method is helpful because we all know what to expect. We do opening prayer, and then the secretary and the treasurer, and we don't need it written down because we do our things, right? Helpful, but also when we just do our things, are we doing? Are we taking action? Or are we just kind of into a cycle of just reporting out things, right? So I would challenge you that an agenda actually would help you to set the meeting, to make decisions, and to get deeper into conversations of things. So when we have an agenda for the meeting, before the meeting, we want to seek input from people. What needs to be on the agenda? So my experience within Trinity was both as I was the president, but before that, I was the Board of Education. Now, as the Board of Education chair, our Constitution clearly says that the Board of Education chair can serve 2 terms for 3 years. I was the Board of Education chair for 11 years, right? Constitution says I should only be for 6. I was for 11. Because, we follow the Constitution when we like, and then other times we're like, oh, Lisa's really good at being Board of Education chair. We'll just have her keep doing it, right? So that, or nobody else will do it. Let's face that, right? Lisa's doing it, nobody else will. So we'll just keep her doing it. So first of all, challenging you when you look at those, what your terms are, who's doing it, how are we filling in, who needs to be around the table, where do we need changes? Getting input from people as we come into we're going to use the council meeting as the example, but you can take that to whatever board or committee you might be on. So as we come into April, what are things that we need to talk about as we think about our agenda? Then providing it prior to the meeting. So the hope would be you provide input to the president for the council. They would get it to you ahead of time so you would know, oh, one of the things we need to talk about in April is summer worship schedule. And are we going to do it the same we've always done it? Or are we going to have some conversation about that as an agenda item? And then that it's simple and a clear agenda, that it's who brought it forward and what's the information we need. So when you're developing your agenda, what are our desired results and how much time? Why are we here? Let's just keep using summer worship schedule. So it's April. You see that on the agenda. What do you think the result is? When we're meeting in April about summer worship schedule, what are you hoping we're walking out of the meeting with? So a plan, we better have a plan. It's April, right? Like what, and that plan includes what time, are we doing it inside the sanctuary, or do we have a courtyard we use? Do we use the city park? What's the whole summer look like, right? Who's leading the service? Do we have special music we'd like to bring in the summer, right? So lots of conversation, but what are our results? How much time do you think, if you're the president and that comes forward, how much time do you think we need for that conversation? 5 minutes? 5 minutes to do it? Depends on how well we're prepared when we come to the meeting, right? And maybe also, are we looking for change? Have we been talking about like, we're going to shake it up this summer? We might need some more time to discuss and also to deliberate and decide, versus we have a pretty good summer worship schedule and we just want to talk about the July 4th weekend. A lot of people are gone and we want to decide if we want to do something special there or not, right? So that doesn't take as much time. So the president, knowing as you go into that agenda, what is it that we're trying to deliberate to decide how much time should we talk about it. Listing out your agenda topics. Okay, so if it says summer worship schedule, is this informational? Is this a discussion, a decision? So summer worship schedule is probably a decision. What is an example of something that might be an agenda item that's informational? Telling you, yep, the meeting's coming up, right? Telling you that Vacation Bible School has been planned already for the last week of July. It's informational. We wanted people on the council to know that, but there's really not input we needed to that, right? Discussion being more of, we want to have some conversation about something, and obviously decision, the summer worship schedule, making our decision. Put your time limits on your agenda items, but be realistic. So who wants to be at the council meeting for 4 hours? Nobody, right? So don't make an agenda that includes time limits for 4 hours, right? Like, be realistic. How much time does your council usually meet in? And then adjust your agenda accordingly, right? How could you do that? Let's say as the president, you're getting this information and it's clear that you have, let's say you meet for an hour, hour and a half at the most, and you have decision-making things that are going to take the whole hour and a half. Then maybe the informational things they're just typewritten, right? The Vacation Bible School the last week of July is just shared and you let people know. We're not going to talk about the informational things because we need to make sure we have time for decision-making. Be realistic. Prioritize your topics. Okay, so I teased about don't sit to the left of Lisa because you go first, but also in Trinity, we do the pastoral report and we always do it last. So why on the agenda is maybe the proprietary board always first and the pastor always last? I don't know why, because that's the way it's just always been, right? Except if you only have an hour and a half of the meeting and you've already spent an hour and 28 minutes talking about very important stuff, and now you turn to your pastor and say, go, you got 2 minutes to tell us your report in, what you've done in the last month, right? It maybe isn't the best. They're hurried, they're rushing. And so Thinking about, is the pastor always last? Are they always first? What's that importance of things and what we need to share? Okay, I like this one. Do a sanity check. So you put together the agenda and you're like, this is 3 hours worth of stuff. Can we really get this done? And if you can't, thinking about what will lead into is decision making. Is the council who needs to talk about these things? Or, if the Board of Ed wants to spend half an hour talking about the curriculum they want to use for Vacation Bible School, on one hand, you might be like, yeah, I really like to talk about the curriculum. Or you might say, I don't know as if the council has half an hour to talk about curriculum for Vacation Bible School. If you really need our input for some reason in this context, how about Board of Education? Instead of giving us 20 choices, come to us with the 2 top ones and your reasons why you'd pick those 2, right? And so that helps to keep in line what the council is responsible for doing, but also uses your time better within your meeting. And then closure. So the council meeting is ending. How many of you just end? You're like, whew, I'm so happy to be done until next month, right? Or going around the table and saying, okay, in May, Board of Education, you're going to come back with X thing, and Property Board, you're going to have bids on how to, we're going to fix the roof. And like, what is it from our discussion at the meeting that actually helps to set the next agenda for the next meeting? So everybody's prepared on what's next. And sometimes in agendas, we get off track, right? Who's had that happen? You go into the council meeting, you got a great plan, and all of a sudden 45 minutes in and you're like, how did we get here with this conversation, right? So sometimes you need to modify the agenda. You thought summer worship schedule would be a 15-minute thing. You didn't realize that, wow, we have a lot of passionate people who want to make some changes for the summer, right? And so you may need to adjust that agenda item. Asking for permission to interrupt. How many would say that's a norm in your council meeting? Asking permission to interrupt somebody. We just let them keep talking, right? Or we interrupt without asking permission and we say, yeah, but listen to me, right? So building a culture where people feel that they can interrupt other people within a context. Make sure you refocus on the issues. I'm all about, having a little side conversation about how's the weather and so-and-so's visiting from out of town. And that's good because it builds social connectedness between all of us. But if we're spending most of our meeting doing social connectedness and not the meeting, then it's how do we come back to what we're actually meeting about? Who's heard of a parking lot and not the place where you put your car? A parking lot in a meeting, right? A few people. So a parking lot is when you came and you were going to talk about summer worship schedule, and then somebody says, yeah, well, I want to talk about what we do during Advent. I think there could be some great changes. And it's April, right? So you say, hey, can we put that in the parking lot? Can we come back to the Advent schedule, but maybe later in the year? Let's pencil that in for August timeframe on how we could do some things better. So we can come back and focus on, we need to decide summer worship schedule instead. So you're acknowledging that it's a valid idea that this person has and we want to talk about it. Just now is just not the right time. And so put it in the parking lot. We talked about setting time limits. What about when there's a change? Do you just change? Or do you talk about what's the benefit of the change? We're going to get new paramount's for the sanctuary. Do we actually talk about it? Some people say yes. Some people, nope. They just show up. You come in on one Sunday, and you're like, wow, look at that. Huh, we got new purple ones. So, right? So talking about the change and what's the benefit of that change. Okay, so you're gonna work on having an agenda that's not just because you sat to the left of Lisa, you get to go first. So what do we actually need to talk about at the meeting? And also acknowledging that's maybe I'll use the Board of Ed still. So maybe the Board of Ed just has informational things this month. they really don't have anything that the council needs to decide on. They don't need any more money. They always need more money, but they don't have an ask this time, right? And so, but maybe the property board has like 6 things that they need to talk about. It's okay for this month's meeting to be about the 6 things for property board and for the Board of Ed to say, here's our informational things to provide to you. You can just read through it, right? Because maybe next month, the Board of Ed is going to have 6 things and the property board isn't going to have things to decide on, okay? So as we think about making decisions, so who decides? Okay, who decides in your congregation to sing fewer verses on Communion Sunday? Who decides that? Worship committee. Anybody else decide that? The pastor. Okay, so pastor, worship committee, minister of music, if you have somebody for that, right? So a few different people who might decide how many verses. I do like to tease on this. I'll keep using my congregation. We are a wonderful congregation. There are several people in my congregation who do not like to sing 10 verses to a song. They've made that very clear. Right. They voice it though. I mean, the rest of us, we don't like it either. We just sing it every time it comes up, and right. But they're like, we don't want to sing 10 verse hymns, right? And so over time, we don't sing very many hymns that have a lot of verses to it. So who made the decision? The congregation did over time, right? And the worship committee has said, okay, we hear you. And we will, sometimes we do sing longer hymns if it's appropriate. How about we need to fix the leaky roof? Yeah, the guys that are gonna do the work. Yeah, right? And for how many of you, as she is saying, how many the guys are the guys that are sitting in these pews? Right? That's okay. Right? In some churches, that's going to be the guys sitting in the pews going up, right? Now, for those of you where maybe the guys aren't going to go up on the roof, who is going to decide that we are fixing the roof and how it's going to get done? Whose job is that to decide? Facilities board or property board? And the council, depending on the cost, right? So, somebody goes up there and it's just a loose shingle, we're probably all okay with just fix that shingle, right? They go up there and it's tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars to fix. I think as council members, we're not okay with Joe just deciding he fixed it and turned the bill into the church, right? We know it needed to be fixed, but there needed to be some conversation about who's doing it, how are we getting bids, right? If it's a really big project, are we going to get bids? Are the guys going to actually do it? So, yeah. Who decides we're going to hold worship outside in the summer? Worship committee, pastors, the congregation, right? It might be back to the other one where the congregation says, we'd like at least twice during the summer to have something outside. They give it to the worship committee, but the worship committee is probably the group who decides with consultation of the pastor that we're going to do this outside. Who else might need to be involved in that decision? We're going to do worship outside. Who's setting up the chairs, right? And now it might be bring your own, right? So we've done worship in the park where we say, everybody bring your own chair, and then people are individually responsible. But sometimes we've done where we've taken the chairs out. And so again, like who's doing that? Are the ushers coming early and setting up chairs? Is there another committee who's setting up chairs? Who's moving the keyboard outside so we have some music? Are we moving the keyboard outside? So a lot of decisions when we think we're just gonna have worship outside. Should be easy, right? Okay, so somebody decides we decorate the church the Sunday after Thanksgiving. Is that when you decorate your church? Oh, the Saturday after Thanksgiving. Because Sunday is the first day of Advent. Oh, so the altar guild is who does the work, but the pastor is kind of set. That's when we do it. Right. And then if that's when we do it, does everybody actually know in the congregation that that's when we do it? Do your young families actually know that on Saturday is when we decorate the church? And then if we have a big Christmas tree, that had they known, they would have brought their kids to help hang decorations on the tree, but they actually don't even know that on Saturday we decorate for Christmas season. Nice. Right. Yeah, so I'm just going to repeat for the people on Zoom. So in his congregation, they announce it, and it is like a congregational community event to have fun together, have treats together, and make it an event rather than just one group is supposed to be responsible for doing that and knowing that. So how their congregation shifted that paradigm to make it more about community. Who decides to post a message on your church Facebook page? How many of you have Facebook? How many of you know in your congregation who's actually posting on your Facebook page? Is that person the pastor? Oh, pastor. Yep. So some of you, it's the pastor. Somebody said no over here. A council member that's posting. Church secretary does it. Youth director. Oh, you have a tech team for their congregation. So a few different people who can post things. IT person for some of the congregations who have that ability to post on social media. I think it's important for congregational leaders to know, do you have social media? And if so, who's posting on it so that you can be aware of what messages are going out. And also how you use that platform. I happen to, Les is from Mineola, I know that, and I follow Mineola's Facebook page, and Pastor Hannah posts stuff at least weekly, if not more, about what's going on in their congregation. And that's how they use their Facebook page, right? Trinity, we do a live Facebook stream. So come to our Facebook on Sunday to watch our service live, and then we post the recording. We do a little bit of posting in between, but it's really a place to get the service, not so much to get a bigger picture of things. So as leaders, do you have Facebook or social media, whatever kind? Who's posting on it? And also, as a congregation, what kind of messaging do we want going out on Facebook, right? Do we post things do we post bigger picture things like what today's sermon was about? Do we post things that are about people individually in the congregation? And most congregations don't do that unless it's like some celebratory thing and that person is okay with posting on Facebook. But we don't typically post like funerals and the things that are going on in our church in the coming week. And finally, who decides to give the staff a raise? Council. Good. So he said, I'm just going to repeat him, the budget committee, personnel committee, the budget committee, the council, and then the congregation. 4 steps. A board of trustees who makes those decisions, right? And we had in your materials today, there's information about compensation guidelines for our pastoral staff, right? But even our staff like our maintenance or janitorial staff, our secretaries or office administrators. We all come from different contexts, right? In the size of our church and how many staff we have, we may have a process where we have 4 unique bodies that are reviewing things, or we may have a very small congregation, right? But ultimately, even in a small congregation, who decides that the secretary gets a raise, right? And it shouldn't just be Lisa's the president and she decided, or Pastor Chris is the pastor and he decided that the secretary, but it should still come back to council, right? We've worked in our congregation, I would say like 5-6 years ago, even, we weren't very good about giving feedback to our staff, right? I mean, we kind of were in that world like, no feedback's good feedback, right? I mean, if we're not complaining about the bulletin on Sunday, it must be fine. You don't need to change anything. And so we changed our mentality, and actually our secretary is the lay ministers board does her review, because they're working with her on bulletins and funeral bulletins and all of that. And so they can give her feedback on what they're seeing. And then our janitorial staff has a review with the property board so that they can give feedback on how he's doing. And then the council has decided, what percent or what are we able to give for raises. And so then those boards have the authority to give that raise based upon what's been decided. So in our process, the pastor is really not involved in the staff raise for our other staff. They can give feedback, right? I work well with the secretary, whatever it might be, but they don't actually make the decisions on who gets a raise. It's the council. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about some group decision-making tools for how do we go about actually deciding when we have something before us. Now, how many of you, when we need to decide summer worship schedule, we just sit down around the table and we'll just do some talking, and then we'll make a decision, right? And sometimes what happens in that is we all turn to the president. President, what do you want? Or we all turn to the pastor. Pastor, what do you want? Right? Or the lay ministers, whoever it is, we just turn to that one person and say, what do you want? But I'm going to walk us through a few examples of how some different tools you can use to have a group make a decision. So the first tool is called snow cards brainstorming. Some of you may have done this activity. It requires Post-it notes and a pen, and you give the people in the group so many Post-it notes, and maybe instead of summer worship schedule, we're trying to decide we'd like to do some community service in our community, and we want to get out to community, but do some kind of community service project out in our community. But that's all we know right now. We want to do something. So we would take these Post-it notes and everybody in the group would just write down, right? So if we give everybody 3 Post-it notes, it's a snowball. So they write down 3 things. Then you put them up on the board and you start looking at, are there any similarities? Oh, look, 4 of us mentioned we'd like to do a community service project doing something with people's flowers and landscape and that kind of thing. And so we get all the ideas up there on the Post-it notes. And then as a group, you start figuring out where there's similarities, where there's clusters, where do those snowballs come together to make a bigger snowball? And then ultimately you decide. Now, on one hand, we might have all had a big cluster for doing outdoor work, flowers and that kind of thing. But then we think about maybe in my congregation, it's like, we have a lot of elderly members, and getting down in somebody's garden and pulling out bushes is not going to be the right thing for them. But maybe planting some Mayday baskets where they could be sitting at a table is the right thing. So we modify our decision within the context of what our group is. So snow cards is simply doing the Post-it notes, getting your ideas out, and then clustering them together to get to your decision. The next one is called station to station brainstorming. And so, so I should have said, how many of you have done the snow card type activity, whether it's at church or at other events? Few people. Yeah. So station to station brainstorming is where you put up ideas. And so we could say we have different flip charts out, and we are going to make a decision about what's a decision we can make? Anybody wrestling with a decision? Calling a new pastor. There's a good one. So we're going to put some flip charts up, and we're going to say, when it comes to a pastor, what do I need for Sunday sermon? What do I need for visiting people? What do I need for one-on-one counseling? You know, right? We could, what are the topics that we think of that a pastor does? But then what you do, you have the topics up there. Instead of people individually writing their ideas, you say, okay, group break up. Karen, Steve, and I end up at the first one that's about Sunday sermon. And we have 5 minutes to talk about amongst ourselves. What do we think would be most important for skills and qualities in a pastor for Sunday sermon? And we would come up with, don't talk more than 10 minutes. Probably not the best one. Okay, right. But that's what we decide, right? Don't talk more than 10 minutes, right? And so we decide that. Then you say break again. And the thing is that Steve and Karen and I don't go to the next one. We move around so that we are interacting with other people. We left behind our sheet that said don't talk for more than 10 minutes, right? But another group comes along and says, they don't cross it out, right? They don't say, no, I don't agree with you, but they can modify it, or they can add to it that, you know, hey, during the summer, maybe 10 minutes, but like the rest of the year, I'm okay with 15 minutes or whatever the context is. So each group as they're coming is adding to that brainstorm on the sheet. And so again, at the end, you have lots of ideas up there, and then you can come back through and go, okay, as we look at all the ideas about when we go to call a pastor, what skills and qualities we want for Sunday sermon, what comes through as the themes on things. Oops, I didn't want to move yet. Then, okay, who's used station to station brainstorming? Few people. Okay. Fist to 5. Has anyone ever heard of this? This is super easy, especially like with youth group, right? Okay, we need to decide what we are having for supper at youth group on Wednesday night. So 0, like this, means this is, I do not like this idea. And then it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? 1 is, you know, I don't agree with that, but I'd be okay with it. All the way up to 5, I love the idea, right? So you're the youth, and I say, okay, we have 2 choices for supper on Sunday night. So we're gonna go, can I see fist to 5 for pizza? Now you gotta show me. Do you want pizza? You want pizza? Raise your hands. 0 to 5. I got a few 5s. I got a lot of people not raising their hands. Pizza is not a winner. Yeah. Okay. Oh, okay. Okay, tacos, because taco in a bag. Oh my gosh, if we serve one more taco in a bag. Okay, so pizza for the pizza. Fist to 5. Show me for pizza. Okay, now show me for taco in a bag. Okay, I think it's gonna be pizza, right? But you can even do a question, right? Like, let's say you're talking about fixing, you've been at council, we've been talking about fixing the leaky roof. It feels like if I just had 15 more minutes as the president, that we could get to a decision. But it's time, like we should be done, right? So you can also say to your council, can you show me on fist to 5, 0 to 5, do you think we should spend 15 more minutes on this topic? And if all of your council members raise their hand and say, you know, a 5, like, yes, I'm willing to give you 15 more minutes so that we can hash out what we're doing about the roof, then you know, as the leader, I can keep going. But if people are like, right, then you know, okay, we're going to need to table the decision about fixing the roof. Luckily, we're going to be in a drought. And so we won't have to worry about leaking. I don't know, right? You know, and so and then you set a plan. When are you going to come back to that decision? So, so FIST to 5 is, again, just a 0 to 5 quick read of how things are going, or a quick decision on things. Then, okay, criterion grid. So now it gets more complicated. And so this might be, where should the youth go to summer camp? We've decided as a congregation, we are going to fully fund all of our youth, grades 5 through 12, going to summer camp. Right? That's awesome that you're doing that. Now, how are you going to decide where to send them? Right? So you can use a criterion grid where essentially you would put some camps over here on the left, and then across the top, you would put the things that maybe the kids are interested in. The kids say, we want a place that we can go swimming. So you put swimming, and then you say, well, does this camp have swimming? Does this camp have swimming? Do they have, you know, right? And then one kid says, well, I want to ride horses. Okay, which one has horses, right? And so you kind of help them also, right, as part of the decision making of, here's all the camps, what are all the things you want, so that they can see, you know, maybe this camp wasn't our first choice, but now that we see it has all the things, not just the to-do, but we don't want to ride in the car more than an hour to get to camp, right? Maybe their first choice was actually 3 hours away, doesn't offer the things they want, and then they can see visually, and it helps them get to their choice. And finally, the last one is dots to prioritize ideas. This is similar to the other one where we had the flip chart and we said that we didn't want the pastor to have more than a 10-minute sermon, right? So if we had all those ideas up on the flip chart, you can also then give people 3 dots. So now they have to go around on those flip charts and put a dot next to the ones that were most important. So when I'm calling a pastor, even while Karen and Steve and I were meeting, if I was passionate about not having more than a 10-minute sermon, but then when I see all the qualities and skills that a pastor could bring, and I only can do 3, I might decide that what's most important to me is that they are empathetic and that there's other things that are more important than the 10-minute sermon, right? So the dots help to kind of actually show us as a group where we are, and people individually do it, right? So it's also not like, you know, I gave into the 10-minute sermon because Karen was a strong leader and pushed us for that, right? But people individually put their dots on, and then you can see as a group where the decision may lie. So I'm just going to wrap up with so some resources. So first of all, on the Council as Leaders website, they have some information, especially for secretaries and financial secretaries, treasurers, for helping you with all those duties that have much more detailed parts to their job. And then I'm going to open it up for questions. The Synod, Southeast Minnesota Synod, if you just put council leaders in. Yep. Nice. Sure, sure. So for the people on Zoom, so we'll talk a little bit about how do you build connectivity as leadership, as council members. And so for their congregation, they share one personal concern that they can pray about together at the start of their meeting. Anybody else do anything to make connections in council? That's okay. Sure. Sure. So when you have a major change going on, or, calling of a pastor or other things that are major things, to have a retreat to dedicate more time or away from, right? You know, so starting the church year with a retreat as well, so people can connect that way. Other ways that you've connected as council. Yeah. Nice. Nice. So sharing of the mission and vision at the beginning of the meeting. Oh, so spending 15 to 30, doing a book study together and spending that time, and also, and saying as a council, like, this is important to us, right? And so, sure. And using leadership topics to build that. Nice. How about, okay, so council meetings, okay, right. Put your hand up. Everybody put your hand up. Everybody can do it. Put your hand down if your meeting, keep them up. Put your hand down if your meeting is less than half an hour. If it's an hour, put your hand down. If it's an hour and a half, 2 hours. Okay, so somewhere between the hour and a half kind of thing. Oh, it varies on who the president is. Yes. Karen is on Synod Council. Anybody else on Synod Council with me right now? I'll tell you, I run an efficient meeting, but I have to remind myself to slow down, right? Because I'm all about doing the business. And sometimes I forget, we could spend 5 minutes saying hello to each other. We don't have to jump into the agenda, right? And that's for me to remember as the president, right? So good point. Or who the pastor is, right? In their style, right? And how much input they want on some various things, especially maybe if you're newer, and not just a pastor, but the president, and you're just trying to figure it out. Yeah. Depending on what the agenda item is. And yeah. Yep. Is leading. I think, yep. I would say ground rules are great for any organizational meeting. And my first thought is that not the pastor, that the president helps to set that, unless if they feel that that's not their skill set. Is there somebody else on the council who is good at just helping to lead through? And you don't need to, does everybody know what we mean when we say ground rules? And you don't have to have 20 ground rules, right? What's some ground rules that your council may already have? One person speaks at a time. We start on time. Treat people with respect. We start on time. Do we end on time? Is that a ground rule? Right? So sometimes we might have a ground rule that says we start on time, but maybe we don't have a ground rule that says we end on time because we work the agenda again, right? We're at time and we just need 15 more minutes to figure out this leaky roof. If we have a ground rule that says we end on time, right? The person who's all about rules is like, but we have a rule that says we should have ended. Mm, right, right, right. Mm, sure, sure. Because it just took more time as you were processing and deciding, what are we going to do about sabbatical? Yeah, yeah, right, right, right. And being okay with that sometimes, right? Like the sabbatical or, what if there's a big change coming that, that everybody understands, for the next 6 months, whatever, we're going to be wrestling with this. And so can we all just plan that council is going to be half an hour longer, right? And get people's buy-in to that versus people coming in and thinking we've always been done by 8:30 and we're never getting done. And then it leads to emotional, oh yeah, yes, pointing at their watch, right? Right. 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 So being okay with sometimes saying somebody else needs to delve into this topic and bring it back to the council, right? I will say that another thing to think about, again, since the beginning of time, Trinity, we have always done our boards meet at 6:00 and our councils meet at 7. Do you think we can get a written report from the Board of Education who just met at 6:00 in order for 7:00? We know this. We're struggling with that, right? So there's no written report in that. But also, if the Board of Ed isn't done yet, what happens? Oh no, we start at 7:00. We start. Then the Board of Ed chair leaves that table over there and comes over here. He or she has no idea what the rest of her board is deciding, right? Because they weren't done. And so even our own congregation struggle with, on one hand, it's nice because everybody knows this. When you get elected to council, it's the second Wednesday of the month and you just plan from 6 to 8:30. But sometimes it doesn't allow the boards to get their work done before their board chair has to be at council. And so that's an issue. Sorry, Heidi. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. Nice. Thank you, Heidi. The whole council? But so you're president. So the person of the leader is a 3-year, but are like your board of ed, your secretary or your treasurer or the other people. Yeah. Right. It's change. Right. The at large is probably every other year. Yes. Right. 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 Before they can get back on. Yeah. And I think, and it's also, like, is it good or is it bad? Right. It depends on your congregation. So again, in our congregation, you're vice president for 2 years, and then you're president for 2 years, and then you get to run. We don't do past president, right? No, now like on one hand, you're like, well, that's worse. Now I got to serve 4 years. And if I was in his congregation, I'd only have to serve 3 years, right? But we also have our vice president for 2 years. We kind of say, you're learning, right? You don't have to have been on any boards, you get to learn for 2 years about council, about what does property board do? What do they all do? So that when you become president, you have that learning under you, right? That's our model, right? That might work for us, but it may not be the right fit for what your congregation has. I saw hands here. Yeah. Yeah. So, and I would just, I know we're at time.
The Zoom people are wondering if you can repeat in summary what people are saying.
Hello, Zoom world. This current conversation that we're having is talking about how do we as leaders of the council be transparent for our whole congregation. And the first example that was offered is when you have a council that is made up of diverse representation in your congregation. So perhaps that's younger members and older members, that different congregational members will go to them as the leaders to share their input that then they can bring to the council. Another thing to your question that I was going to mention is do you have minutes from your council meeting, and are they in the newsletter, right? Like, again, I know even in my own world, right? I send emails all day long and then somebody inevitably says, well, I didn't know. Deep breath, right? Because my immediate response is like, I sent 6 emails about it, but it's like, okay. So also when I say to you, put it in the newsletter, there will still be somebody who didn't see it in the newsletter that month, and that's okay. But at least we're trying, right? We're getting the messages out. What were the main things that we talked about? Anything else anybody has on how you are transparent with the congregation? So when there's a concern item like the budget, then having a monthly just snippet about where we're at. So if it's the budget, this is where we're at financially, or maybe taking that idea if you were thinking about to his idea about we might start a daycare in our congregation, right? You could share little tidbits each month about what's the need for daycare. Why are we looking at this idea? Whatever it might be. Perfect. So the last idea is when there is a project that's going to be a large financial need in the congregation, they announce several weeks in advance that they're going to talk about it on a Sunday after church, and then bring the group together so they can learn about what is this need and why and what the cost will be. And so congregation can have input into that as well. So I want to thank all of you in the room as well as those on Zoom for joining us today. It is 2:50, so I cut a little bit into your break time, but you have break until 3 o'clock, and next session start at 3 o'clock. So thank you, everyone.